Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor, and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
Hello and welcome to episode 36 of Thrive Deeper. I'm going to keep this really short at the intro here because we have got a massive episode. We're going to cut straight to it. This is part 2 of the Intertestamental period. We're going to sit down with Uncle Matt. He's going to tell us the story of the Maccabees and a lot more. So get your history books out, get your thinking caps on, be ready for the story. We'll jump into it straight after the break here on Thrive Deeper. Well, Matt, last week we just awkwardly cut off what we were talking about and just, left everybody hanging. We're in the middle. Where are we? We're sitting probably about 300 BC, and we're like, okay, the Persians are over here, Jews are all over the place, and there's this Greek thing on the horizon.
Yeah. The real force to be reckoned with is coming over from the west, from Greece. And there's a young upstart called Alexander the Great, who is going to be really the greatest conqueror that the world has seen up to this point. Now, Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Empire, the might of the Persian Empire, in 333 BC. So this is where we're picking up our story. So Persia will still be a force in the east, for a little while longer, but gradually Alexander's going to move east and completely conquer the whole of the Persian Empire. He's going to do that in a way that sort of brings them. He really, he does this in a way that is really, I think, shrewd. The way that he gets them on side, and so lots of Persians actually follow Alexander and.
He's an amazing leader.
He was an amazing leader. Anyway, so he actually, in the early stages of this campaign, there's this decisive battle against the Persians in 333 BC. He comes down, which he wins, comes down into Palestine. He lays siege to Tyre, the city of Tyre, which was just offshore, very difficult. No one had been able to get to it. Ezekiel had prophesied the final fall of Tyre. Well, this comes at the hand of Alexander the Great. This fulfills this prophecy of Ezekiel against Tyre. Now, during the siege of Tyre, he actually sent to the Jews in Jerusalem and demanded that they come to his aid. And they refused. Said, "Look, we have this. We're under oath to Darius in Persia, and it's going to cause us big problems. We can't come." So,
because the Jews were they were still under Persian rule in a sense.
They're still under Persian rule,
but they were their own autonomous, in one sense. And the fact, what I mean by that is, Alexander was able to go to send to the Jewish people,
that's right,
as their kingdom and say, come and help me.
But they're still under the Persian, still tied to the Persians, and so. They refused. Now, he would have been infuriated by this, and maybe they didn't expect that he would win, that he would capture Tyre as well, because no one before had. Yeah. But anyway, he did, and of course he comes down to Jerusalem, and he's not happy. And so they get together and they pray, and according to Josephus, they find out he's coming, and they get together and they pray. And so what they actually do is that they open up the city, they open the gates, and they come out to meet him. And all the priests are dressed up in their priestly robes, and the high priest comes out. And anyway, Alexander, when he comes to the city, they as you can imagine, this whole army lined up. So you can imagine how terrifying this is. And he actually goes up himself, separates from the army. When he sees the high priest, he goes, tells them to stay. And he gets off his horse and goes up to the high priest and salutes the high priest and honors God because, according to Josephus, he had a dream before the whole campaign against the Persians, that he had this dream where the high priest in this garb appeared to him and said, "You're going to win this war against the Persians." And so he honors God, and he goes in and he offers a sacrifice to God in the temple, according to Josephus.
And again, I was reading through that as well, and according to their to the Jewish tradition, it was during that time where he sat down in discussion with the high priest, and the high priest, and this is according to their to their stories. I love to think that it was true. Is that they opened up the book of Daniel with Alexander the Great and said, "This is the prophecy, and here you are." In the book, and he was like, and from that point on, historically, we know that he had a soft spot for the Jewish people.
That's right. Yeah.
And he looked after them, made sure that they were safe and everything like that.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people would say it's because he saw. Yeah. They rightly pointed out that you're the fulfillment of this prophecy here.
It's hard to know whether stories like those are true. I mean, Josephus is look, in the most part, are fairly reliable. Yes. That's not in Josephus, that part.
No.
But the bit about him offering a sacrifice in the temple, that's recorded by Josephus, who's a Jewish historian from around sort of 70 BC, around that sort of period. 70 AD, sorry. Yeah. So look, Alexander moves east, conquers everything to the border of India. You know, the Samaritans at one point. He conquers Egypt first. Interestingly, the Samaritans rebelled against him, and he comes back and destroys the city. And really once and for he absolutely decimates the city of Samaria. I mean, they're going to recover to some extent, but they're not going to be the force that they were. He conquers everything. He dies actually of some, was it poisoning? Was it a fever? But after his death, he dies very young in 323 BC. And while still on campaign, and his
whole life was a campaign.
Yeah, really. His whole life was a campaign, and there was some. This is where it gets a little complicated, but there was lots of squabbling for power struggle among his generals.
And according to the legend, the generals around him at his death said, "What do we do next?" And he said, "Give it to the strongest." Like he let it get, like his last words were whoever says, and
classic Alexander.
Yeah, and it just, devolved into, a whole bunch of fractions there.
Yeah, but amazingly though, what he did achieve, even though his empire is going to be broken up after this, what he actually achieved was an incredible cultural unity over the whole of the Near and Middle East, which would last for 1,000 years. Because, he treated Persians equally to the Greeks. He encouraged his men to intermarry with them. As a result, lots of people from all of the parts of his conquered territories followed him, and they adopted the Greek language, which they actually developed. There's almost this new kind of ancient Greek, which became known as Common Greek or Koine Greek, which is the Greek in which the New Testament is written, which was also the common language of the Roman Empire.
Okay, so I think this is a good point to talk about when we were talking about the common language, to go back down into Egypt and see what was happening there. I mean, we're fast-forwarding a little bit with the Greek translation.
That's right. I'll get to that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, good. You're jumping ahead.
I'm jumping ahead. Sorry, I got excited. Excited.
So, look, but basically, and this is an important thing right now. This what's known as Hellenism. Hellenism is the Greekifying of the whole
world.
Of the empire. I mean, it was just cities all over Europe adopted. Europe. Cities all over the empire adopted this way of life of the Greek polis. It was. It was the quest for the good life. There were Greek entertainments, arts, sports, philosophies spread everywhere. So this sort of this Greek ideal way of life became a thing really through. I think that through Alexander, because that's part of the difference of him as a conqueror, because he wasn't doing it in the name of like a god or a religion in one sense. He was doing it because he was taught in the golden age of the Greek
from philosophers.
By Aristotle, in fact, was his tutor. How's this for a personal? Your personal tutor is Aristotle. Who was taught by Plato, who was taught by Socrates. That's a pretty good lineage there.
I know, exactly. So he's got this almost like the first truly Western civilization way of thinking.
Yeah.
And he's out to civilize the world. Not to conquer it, but it's not to put them under the thumb or to make himself greater. It's this different way of thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it lasts so long and has such a lasting effect.
It's a 1,000-year effect. I mean, it's quite amazing. Now, as I said, there was this tussle for leadership, but the two areas or the two dynasties that we need to concern ourselves with for Jewish history are the Ptolemies and the Seleucids.
And the Ptolemies are down south
in Egypt, and the Seleucids are up north, sort of Syria and this area. So, the most famous of the Ptolemies is Cleopatra, from Antony and Cleopatra and so forth. She was a Ptolemaic leader. Yeah, it descended from this Ptolemaic dynasty. Yeah. So,
which is unusual, because when we think of Egypt and we think of these pharaohs and everything like that, we have a different way of thinking. But then we go Cleopatra; she was actually like a Greek, lineage, and everything like that. It's a totally different way of thinking.
That's right. It is. So Judea is sort of sandwiched actually between. So now there's going to be lots of warring between Ptolemies and Seleucids, and Judea is sort of, as usual, sandwiched between them. I mean, Daniel 11 talks about the kings of the north and the kings of the south, and he's talking about the Seleucids in the north and the Ptolemies in the south. Now, in 320, Ptolemy took control of Jerusalem and actually deported a considerable number of Jews from there to Alexandria, which was his base. Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, and
very
this is getting to what you were preempted. They lived there with free status, actually, under their own laws. And in time, many other Jews joined them from around the empire because the word got out. We've got it really good here. We've got relative autonomy here in Alexandria.
And like you've already pointed out in the last episode, there was already a large Jewish population.
That's right.
In Egypt.
Well, Alexandria is in the north of Egypt, and Elephantine is in the south. Yes. So they're
spread apart. Yeah, but there's a history there.
Yeah, there's certainly a history there. This Jewish community in Alexandria really becomes the most important of the diaspora, and this is because. First of all, within a couple of generations, these Jews were all Greek speakers. Yeah. Okay, so it was for this community that the first ever translation of the Bible occurs, and that was into the Greek language. Now there was never before a translation of the Hebrew Bible. It was in Hebrew, and that was it. And so they translate it into Greek, into the Common Greek. Mm-hmm. And this is the Septuagint, known as the Septuagint. It gets its name Sept from 70 because traditionally there were these 70 elders who made this translation.
Whether that's actually,
whether that story is true.
Because the other part was it was 70 elders in 70 days. Yeah. Was the other part of the tradition. 70 days. Now
the Septuagint, which was this, so this is 260 BC. Yeah. Just to give nail this to a date.
Yes.
Septuagint is important because it's from the Septuagint that the quotes in the New Testament are taken.
Well, the Septuagint was Jesus's and the common person's Bible, Old Testament.
That's right.
Was this what was happening?
Because they spoke Aramaic, and although it still would have been read in Hebrew in the synagogues,
but when they were speaking to the crowds, this is what they quoted.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Although I'm not exactly sure about whether it always would have, whether some synagogues would have used the Septuagint. I'm not sure about that. Okay. Maybe I'll send that question in to Thrive for next week.
We can do some research.
So,
I imagine, again, this is just off the top of my head, depending where the where the synagogue was.
Probably, that's right.
Depending what the spoken, language.
Right, yeah. So during this period, the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea they continued to have relative autonomy as was given to them under Alexander, as you said before. They were given this autonomy. They were able to freely practice their religion. Now, at first, Judea was under the Ptolemies, but it came under the Seleucids under Antiochus III, one of the Seleucid leaders. Now, his son, actually, Antiochus IV, is going to be very significant for Jewish history. So, the Seleucids take control of Judea in 200 BC. And at first, they continue their favourable situation. Okay, but this is not going to last for long. Now, we're going to shoot to some internal issues in Judea at this time. During the time of Antiochus III, Judea had one of its most celebrated high priests. It was a Zadokite priest. Now, the Zadok was the priest under David and Solomon.
Yes.
And so it was to be high priests were meant to be descended from Zadok, ideally. So this
which is an inner part of the Levite.
It's
clan.
the inner part of the Levites. Okay, the high priest. He had to be a Levite.
Yes.
Actually, had like a descendant of Aaron. Actually, more specifically, and but to be a Zadokite priest was the highest. Yes. That was your first choice. Okay, so his family, this Zadokite priest family, were known as the Oniads, after his father Oni, Honi, but Oniad spelled O-D. So the Oniads. Now, the Oniads absolutely deplored Hellenism.
And then again, just so you understand, that's the Greekification of the culture. And I'm going to give you a great illustration of this. I was thinking about this before. Imagine an old school. This might be yourself. This might be a grandfather, an uncle, or something like that. And again, I'm speaking to our Australian listeners who are immensely Australian, proud Australian, and they begin to get grumpy about the Americanization of the culture. What's this Halloween? We don't do Halloween. Like, they're beginning to get really upset about the culture beginning to change. Now, that is just a small example. Imagine that times 1,000, and that's what a lot of the Jews were saying, hang on, what is...
Yeah. Well, it's more than that because it's religious. There are some strong religious objections to Greek culture that they have. Some of them are a little overplayed, but on the whole, there are some valid issues that they have. But then there's another leading family. Now, this is where this gets interesting. And this other leading family are going to push for Hellenism.
Yeah. Move with the times, boys.
Yeah.
Come on.
And now what's going to happen eventually to give is that they're going to gain the upper hand, actually.
As far as political...
As enforcing Hellenism in Jerusalem.
Yep.
It's this other group. Now, they are known as the Tobiads.
Yes.
Now, does that name recall anything to you, Tobias, from the time of Nehemiah? Remember? Remember the guy who had his office, headquarters in the temple? And Nehemiah just couldn't believe,
Chuck it out.
Sorry, Ezra. That was at the end of Ezra, I think, wasn't it?
Where
he came back and this guy had been given this. Hang on, was that?
That was in Nehemiah.
Yeah, that was in Nehemiah. Sorry, I had a blank then.
That's all right.
And so this. I mean, we were talking about how this has ongoing effect, right? Well, he is descended from this Tobias, and he's going to be this family going to be really strong Hellenizers. So this craze for Hellenism prompted the rise of a pious reactionary group. The Hasidim.
Where that word still
That's right. These are the Pharisees. That started as this reaction against the Hellenization of Judea.
So and then
they're the old-fashioned conservatives of their time. They're the guys that are saying we need to stick to the King James.
Can I just say, I love these guys. I know that's not popular to say, but as a Pharisee myself, I identify so much with these. But again, we're going back to the history there of understanding where the roots of these guys come from.
Right.
So they're reacting against. They are the high priests. They are the holy ones. They are the men of the law. They are observing. And can we just say they are the real Jewish believers?
Without them, there would not have been a Judaism in the first century.
Yes.
So the Hasidim actually are really, really important at this stage. Now, look, meanwhile, 190 BC.
Can we say what the other group ended up, what we would call them in the New Testament, the other group of Hellenizers who were becoming politically wealthy, ruling party, they end up, their fraction out of that becomes the Sadducees. Partly.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, well, because the Sadducees in the time of Jesus are the chief priests. Really, because the Hasidim are not like an official. They're a pious reactionary group, and that there would have been scribes and amongst them, and whereas the ruling classes were the Sadducees.
Yes.
These are descended from the traditional priestly family, the real elevated priestly families. So that's right. That's the Sadducees. Now, so we move. Look, meanwhile, 190 BC, Antiochus III suffers this crushing defeat at the hands of the Romans. Now, the Romans are now emerging as a force to be reckoned with in the West. Okay?
Here come the Italians. Watch out! Watch out!
So we got to keep an eye on the Romans now, okay? Because they're lurking there. So from this point on, they are gradually now becoming the major power.
Yeah.
The Seleucids are, from this point on, actually forced to pay the biggest indemnities, war indemnities ever known in ancient history, to the Romans. They are ruthless, these ruthless Romans. Now, to raise the money, Antiochus fell to raiding the wealthy temple shrine of Elam, and he was actually killed by a surprise attack of the inhabitants of this temple town in 187 BC. Now, his successor, Seleucus IV, he was left to raise taxes, which he did throughout his territories, including Judea. And this is actually mentioned I mention this because this is mentioned in Daniel 11. Daniel 11:20 says his successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. So this is going to be hard times for the Jews, because Antiochus III's successor, Seleucus IV, has to raise this money, and he hears also that there's a whole lot of wealth there in that Jewish temple up there, all of these gold articles. Now, they actually go to take it. He sends his men to go and take it. But at first, according to 2nd Maccabees, they were frightened off by a heavenly apparition. Wow. So they all go off. But eventually he sends his people in, and the temple eventually is plundered and desecrated for its wealth. Now, Seleucus was assassinated in 175 BC, and he was succeeded by his younger brother, Antiochus IV. Now, this is the important guy for our period. Now, at this point, Jason, the brother of Onias, Onias was one of these this family, he actually paid Antiochus IV for the high priesthood. I mean, you think about how this is going to go down. Yeah. He paid for the high priesthood. Now, look, he was the right sort of lineage and everything. So, okay, we can. I mean, it's like that wasn't popular, but we can put up with this. So he purchases the high priesthood for a very large sum. Antiochus needed the money. Yep, okay, and he promises that he's going to convert to get this. Also, he promises that he will convert Jerusalem into a Greek polis, into a Greek style city. So Jason puts in a massive gymnasium, actually right next to the temple, to promote these athletics. Now, the problem with Greek athletics, you know what the problem with Greek athletics is it was all in the nude. Now, this is a problem, big problem, for Jewish law, in which it was absolutely forbidden for nakedness in public. So this was a big issue, and
really split the population.
That's right, really. So you've got this Jerusalem is now being polarized. You've got the Hasidim, the Hasidic party, and then the Hellenizing party. But the enthusiasm for these sports catches on, and lots of people are getting into this. And there actually was a lot of Jews during this period who went through a reversal of circumcision. Now, you've got to really, because It was obviously if you're you want to look like a Greek, like one of those Greek statues. You want to look like that,
especially if you're performing in the nude.
And if you're performing in the nude, and that means a reversal of circumcision, which was a very painful and I may say dangerous operation,
especially back then. But also, this was part of the Greek culture coming in, and in some places it was out like to try to get rid of this problem in this period.
Yeah.
They were like, circumcision illegal.
Yeah.
No more. Not allowed to do it. Not allowed to practice it. And this was like, wow, we're really splitting the people apart now.
Yeah. Well, look. So Jason purchased it. This sort of sets up a precedent because 3 years after his appointment, another rich priest, Menelaus, offered even more money. And he was appointed high priest by Antiochus, who still needed money. I mean, he just needs money. Jason goes into exile. Menelaus, the problem with him is that he wasn't from the line of high priests. So his appointment really upsets conservative Judeans. Now, worse still, he took treasures from the temple to pay for it. And this was absolute sacrilege. On top of that, Menelaus is an even more radical Hellenizer than Jason. So his appointment is not popular at all. And he has to actually enforce his policies by force. Now, meanwhile, Antiochus decides it's time to make war on the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. The war is successful at first, but becomes really drawn out, which put the king in need of more funds. He goes north to Jerusalem, where Menelaus welcomes him with open arms, escorts him into the temple, which was an absolute sacrilege for a Gentile to go into the temple, to take all of the sacred vessels. So he comes out with even more, pretty much cleans the temple out so he can pay for this war and keep up the indemnities to the Romans so that they don't bother him during this war. And this is just intolerable to the Jews. So when Antiochus returned to fight Egypt, he was opposed by the Romans again. The Romans are there in the background, and they demanded his withdrawal. And actually, the news of this rebuff spread really quickly. And actually, it was exaggerated in Judea to claims that he was dead. He's dead, right? So when Jason heard this in his exile, he gathers an army of 1,000. He attacks Jerusalem to take the leadership from Menelaus.
Wow.
Remember, he's in exile. So they took the city and the temple, and Menelaus is sort of cooped up in the citadel. But the problem was Antiochus wasn't dead. In fact, he was on his way back to Jerusalem,
and he not only
and
not
his
dead,
guy is cooped up.
Yes, he is in a really bad space.
Yeah,
as far as leader.
He's cranky.
Yeah, he's cranky because his whole plan has gone to get into pot. The Romans called his bluff and said,
yeah,
come on, and all right, I'm out.
Yeah,
and he's going back with his tail between his legs, defeated. Right. His plans.
He's going to take it out. Yeah. And so he heard about the attack on Menelaus, and he sends his army ahead to crush Jason's forces. I mean, they did more than this. The city was attacked. It was an absolute bloodbath. Thousands were taken into slavery. And a garrison was posted there to protect Menelaus and impose martial law. And most important part of this is that Antiochus abolished Judea's freedom and autonomy as well as their religious freedom. He said, right, that's it.
No more.
Antiochus said, that's it with Judaism.
Yeah.
I'm sick of these fights over the high priesthood, this Puritanism here that keeps causing these people to rise up. He thinks easiest answer, abolish Judaism. Well, that's going to be his biggest mistake.
Yeah.
But that's what he's going to attempt to do. So he demolishes the city walls, tragically, because now the city is back to where it was before Nehemiah got there.
Yeah.
So this is a very tragic, tragic moment. So this is 167 BC. Like Judaism is outlawed. Temple services closed down. scriptures destroyed. Like you can be executed just for reading the scriptures. Sabbaths and other festivals could no longer be observed.
This is the period of time where circumcision was outlawed.
Food laws abolished. Circumcision was illegal. All at the threats of death. He erects a pagan altar on top of the altar of burnt offering in the temple and dedicates it to Zeus. This is the abomination of desolation spoken of in the book of Daniel. Daniel predicted this. This is all described in detail in the book of Daniel. The king then commands the people to worship Zeus. Now, as I said, this was going to be his biggest mistake, really, because his biggest problem from this point on weren't going to be the Ptolemies, weren't going to be the Romans. His biggest problem from this point on was going to be the Jewish people themselves. Now he would think there's no way. I've completely broken them. They could barely raise an army of 1,000. In the end, they can't really raise an army much bigger than that. But he had been seriously misinformed about the strength of Jewish devotion.
Mostly because he's dealing with almost like the political class in his dealings with the high priest.
Yeah, that's right.
They're paying for position.
Get rid of it.
It's like this
they don't take this seriously. That's
exactly.
Right.
Little did he know.
I mean, they're thinking they're prepared to purchase this leadership. So what then happens is this resistance. Actually, he thinks, well, I've outlawed it. On pains of death. This is a cinch. Well, no, it's not, because actually they will risk their lives to continue to practice their faith. So what follows is a full-blown persecution of Judaism. This is really the first ever religious persecution, really ever, in ancient history. And many are martyred during this period as Antiochus tries to enforce his pagan worship at pagan altars around Judea. Any practice of Judaism, even just refusing to eat pork, or just reading scriptures, was punishable by death. I mean, at one point, the Hasidim and their families, 1,000 people, went out to escape the persecution. They went out and lived in caves in the Judean wilderness. The king's officers found out where they were. They want to weed them out, and they sent a battalion after them. Now, they offered pardon to them. They're all up in the caves, and there's these cliffs. If in the Judean desert, you see these big gorges in these caves. There are actually, in a lot of these caves now, there are monasteries built. Anyway, it's a sidetrack. They offer pardon. Come out to us, and we'll let you live. Problem was, they came on the Sabbath day, and the law. We talked about this in the last episode. And the law commands everyone is to stay where he is on the seventh day. You've got to stay in and around your home. So they refused. And they were basically they refused to defend themselves also because it's the Sabbath day. And they were basically attacked and completely slaughtered. These weren't the only Hasidim around, but this is 1,000 people. This is what's going on in this. So, and they didn't resist. So and actually, it was during this period that you get this growing emphasis on the resurrection. This is often pointed out. What's going to, because the burning question is, what about all these martyrs? What's going to happen to these martyrs? So you get this, it certainly is there. A lot of people say it was invented during this period, but it was certainly there implied in the scriptures already before. But this is where it really,
became a hope.
It really becomes this burning hope. Now,
and again, that point, we will see rise its head again in the New Testament, because Jesus uses it and says, you Pharisees, you religious observant Jews, you believe in the resurrection. You Sadducees, you ruling class, you don't. fight it out.
That's right. Because it was really, it was among the Hasidim, amongst whom were the martyrs that this hope really kind of grew up. So it was a very much a Pharisaic it's very much a biblical thing, but it wasn't a hope of the priestly class. Anyway, look, in terms of passive resistance, that kind of, in a way, that put an end to that. I think they reasoned, look, we're going to disappear as a people group. We need to, we need to fight back. Now, among those who argued for a more active resistance was a certain priest named Mattithiah, who lived in a town called Modim. He was from the Hashmon clan. So he's going to be known as a Hasmonean. This is a Hasmonean family.
Yes.
Okay? Mattithiah. Now, in Modin, a pagan altar was set up there according to the policy in all of the towns. Pagan altars were set up. And he, as the leading citizen, was asked to sacrifice first. Imagine the king's army there, set up the pagan altar. Okay, Mattithiah, come on, we'll give you the opportunity to show that you are behind Antiochus. He refuses, and he protests loudly, saying he and his family would only serve the Lord. So he's pushed aside, probably going to be condemned to death. But another Jew steps forward, says, okay, I'll do it. Another Jew steps forward, at which Mattithiah runs forward, kills the Jew, kills the king's officer. The altar is pulled down. The people get around Mattithiah. The altar is pulled down, and he calls all the faithful to come out with him. And they go out into the desert. So he leaves with his 5 sons and his followers, and he establishes this base in the hill country of Judea. And it's here actually that they heard about this massacre of the 1,000 Hasidim. And they decided at this point that if they were attacked on the Sabbath, they had to resist. So lots of people gather around Mattithiah and his sons, and they form this powerful guerrilla force that would make sudden raids on towns, and they would kill the king's troops and destroy pagan altars. They would kill Hellenizing Jews, and they would circumcise boys whose parents had not done so, and then they would sort of disappear. They come in from the mountains, and then they disappear as quickly as they came. It was a very efficient sort of guerrilla fighting force. Now, they were able to do a lot of damage because Antiochus, his army was actually occupied in the east. So there's a big gap of time when they get to do this. Now, they became known, this Hasmonean family became known as the Maccabees. The Maccabee is the word, it means hammer.
Yep.
It's like
the Jewish hammer.
They were the Jewish hammer, right? Because they're hammering the Seleucids here. Now, at this point, the aged Mattithiah dies, and his son Judas takes the lead. Now, look out for Judas, because he will prove to be a brilliant military leader, brilliant guerrilla chief, actually, initially operating in an area that is actually ideal, in this hilly area with all of these ravines that is really ideal for guerrilla warfare, very difficult for massive armies to sort of operate in this area. So imagine, here they are, they're wiping out garrison after garrison, and Judas, Judas is seen as this sort of divinely appointed leader. It almost becomes this kind of messianic figure with all of these successes. Now, as these raids go on, of course, Antiochus is hearing about this, and Antiochus really underestimated the severity of the rebellion and the size and the strength of the Jewish army. Well, certainly the strength of the Jewish army. Instead of crushing them with a full force of his armies, he sends a force of 3,000. I mean, he's thinking this. Judas has got about 900 men. No, he's not got a big army here. And so Antiochus thinks this should be fine. I'll send an army of 3,000, and we'll go there and we'll destroy them. Well, Judas, a wise and courageous leader, I mean, he defeats them with consummate ease. He attacks them as they're passing through this narrow gorge, kills 1,000, he sends the others fleeing. So Antiochus, he thinks, oh my goodness, okay, so he sends an army twice the size, of about 6,000. But again, they're absolutely destroyed by Judas's, 900 men. So this is beginning to make Antiochus look foolish. So he decides that he's just going to exterminate the Jewish population in Judea because he's just looking like an idiot. So he sent for his most glorified general, a guy called Lysias, and he commanded him to the task. So, because remember, he's going to wipe out Judea. So he sends an army of 40, according to Josephus. Some people say that Josephus's figures are hyped up a bit, and maybe they are. But according to Josephus, sends not Josephus, the Maccabees, the books of Maccabees. Okay, yes. Yeah. Actually, it's a combination of those two.
Yes,
because the history is recorded in the book of Maccabees and in Josephus.
And there's actually other historical documents that document all of this as well.
Yeah, that's right. So Lysias comes with this vast army, allegedly 47,000, which included, by the way, and this is true, all of the most recent armory and military weaponry, imagine it, and including war elephants, which had never been seen in this part of they had never seen an elephant. Can you imagine? Not only a vast army. Yeah. I mean, even if these figures are overinflated, still, I mean, even if it's the half, which is probably more than that, this would have covered the horizon.
Yeah.
Not only that, but you've got this weaponry being rolled forward, and it's like a scene out of Lord of the Rings.
Yes,
then you've got these massive creatures, these elephants, which they'd never seen before.
It's like an army with, the latest military upgrades, like guns and bullets and missiles, coming up with the guys with bows and arrows and knives.
That's right. So they see these armies coming, and there's this classic moment where Judas leads the people in prayer and fasting, to seek God's help, and they all consecrate themselves to God, and it's all very kind of like Joshua, yes. In this sort of the way that they do this.
Again, this is the beauty of this period here. These are a people, everybody following Judas Maccabees here, the Maccabean revolt. These are people whose language and thinking is totally defined by a Jewish way of thinking of the Old Testament. They know all the biblical stories. They know when God. They know the history.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
And they go, we know how this goes. We've seen it happen before.
And Judas was a very pious Jew.
Yes.
I mean, he was extremely pious Jew. Yeah. So he's a hard man.
Yes.
Let's not...
ruthless.
Let's not pull punches there. He was a ruthless man, but he was a very, very pious Jew. So now, so they have this prayer and fasting and so now what happens is that part of the Seleucid army that breaks off actually, and the idea is that they're going to go and attack the camp of Judas by night, okay? Now what Judas does, he leads them on because they stoke up all their campfires to make them look like they're in camp from a distance, up high. Look, hey, we're all here. And then they sneak away, and they sneak around to where their full army is, right? Yeah. So by the time the Seleucid army get to the camp, they realize
there's nobody
it's
there.
Almost daybreak and there's no one there. And meanwhile, Judas and his men have made a guerrilla attack on the Seleucid army, and they are thrown into confusion by this attack because they're thinking they're being attacked right now, but instead it's that they are being attacked themselves.
The classic double
cross. Because who would do that?
Yeah.
Who would attack an army that big?
Yeah.
Well, Judas would. Yeah. With this sort of faith, and it's an absolute bloodbath at the expense of the Greeks, the Seleucids. So this is a monumental defeat of this army, right? So now Lysias, himself, see, he'd sent this army, so in 164 BC, Lysias himself leads an even bigger force. Now, again, numbers may have been pumped up here, but according to the sources, it's 65,000, an army of 65,000 into Judea. By this time, Judas is quickly becoming this kind of messianic figure. He's attracting more. He's probably got an army now of about 7,000. But he's still vastly outnumbered. But he's got the advantage of, this familiarity with the Judean hill country, which is going to be a big advantage for the Jewish army. And he's got this, and so he's able to outmaneuver even this huge army as they come in. He's able to outmaneuver them and slowly pick them off at different points. And it's just, the story is just incredible. That finally he actually manages to throw this army into confusion by using these guerrilla tactics, breaking them up, attacking them as they come through these gorges and from the rear. And he's just this brilliant tactician. But Judas would have said, but with God's help. So of course, again, as they're coming, as this before the force, he's praying for this, and Lysias withdraws. It's according to the sources, there were 5,000 of Lysias's men are killed in just a few hours, and he withdraws. The army's in confusion, and so Antiochus's armies are just devastated, and they met again when Judas's army was at the gates of Jerusalem. He comes back for one more shot, but it's a much shorter battle. The Seleucids really are bereft of hope. He just drives them out of the city, and they're defeated. Now, when Judas and his brothers come into the temple, guess what he sees? He sees this altar set up, and so what they do is that they take the stones away, and they don't know what to do with the stones, so they put them in a special place until a prophet, they say, according to the source, until a prophet should come to tell them what to do with these desecrated stones, and they cleanse the whole area, they get rid of everything, they reestablish all of the right furniture. And they celebrate this rededication of the temple, which they hold this festival that goes for 8 days, and this is celebrated. The rededication of the temple in 165 BC is celebrated to this day in Hanukkah, the feast of Hanukkah. So. This is important because at the time of Christ, they're going to want Jesus to be another Maccabean leader. This is important.
This is the recent history in their minds.
This is the history in their mind. This is their last great sort of godly leader is Judas Maccabeus, really. And so this is going to be in their minds. Anyway, I'll scoot through this next period. So Antiochus lifts the ban on Jewish religion, thinking that this would make peace. Okay, all right.
Yeah. You can be Jews again.
Yeah, you can be Jews again, but I'm still in charge. Well, no. Like, with what army?
Yeah.
So, Judah fortifies the Temple Hill, which signals a complete bid for independence. So this ignites a new phase of the war. Now, this is an interesting turn in the war, really, and some would say a turn for the worse. It's like Judas should have probably left it there.
Got some sort of treaty going.
Yeah, got some kind of just leave it there, because basically they had their independence back, and leave the rest to the there's just going to be some problems caused here, but that's a matter of opinion, really, of course. So because the Hasidim actually were content with their freedom. that they were saying, let's just be let's not provoke more. We've got our freedom back. Let's just leave it there. We've done well so far. God's helped us, but that's because we were fighting for our religious freedom. Let's not push this. But the Hasmonean family, Judas and his brothers, they're like, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And interestingly, this phase didn't meet with the same success. Yeah. It was still successful ultimately, but not the same unbroken success. So anyway, with his power base in Jerusalem established, Judas begins attacking Gentile cities in the area. Probably more to get spoils and really equip himself. Now, by this time, Antiochus dies in Parthia, this 164, and the Seleucid Empire is ruled by this Lysias, who's this regent for Antiochus, a young Antiochus V. And Lysias sends out to destroy Jerusalem and crush the Maccabean revolt. He actually beats Judas in a battle at this point. This is like the first reversal just south of Bethlehem. And he lays siege to Jerusalem. And the Jewish, the rebel, the situation is pretty desperate because they really lacked supplies to withstand a siege. But here, once again, there are some distractions in the east. I mean, Philip, one of Antiochus' generals, revolted, and this distracts him. Like Lysias has to actually withdraw. So he makes this quite a generous treaty with the Jerusalemites. Judea was restored to its semi-autonomous state. Okay, so we're back to where we were, but the problem is Menelaus. Remember Menelaus?
He's still around.
Yeah, he's still around, and he's, but part of the terms that they make, but you have to replace him as well. Well, Lysias is desperate to get back, and not have trouble with the Jews, so he actually is willing to go with this. So he's replaced by a guy that's a little bit more palatable. Now, interestingly, here's another little interesting footnote. Meanwhile, Onias, remember the Oniad family?
Yes.
Onias III, who was actually the rightful heir to the high priesthood. He has gone to Egypt, and he obtains permission to build a copy temple in northern Egypt.
Wow.
Right? So I've already seen a copy temple in southern Egypt. He actually builds this copy temple in northern Egypt. And so there, his sort of legitimate Zadokite priesthood, actually, they move down there, right? And they preside over the same temple rituals as in the Jerusalem temple for 230 years.
Amazing.
There is this Zadokite priesthood with a temple in northern Egypt.
And again, that's a little asterisk because then we go, hang on, we know that Joseph and Mary and Jesus,
that's right,
and maybe Jesus' brothers and sisters had to flee,
and they flee to Egypt because there are Jewish people. Down
now we know why,
and
what was going on down there.
Look, as soon as Lysias left, fighting breaks out between Judas's rebels and these moderates, and an army led by the Seleucid general Nicanor was dispatched actually to aid the sort of right side, but Judas actually came out the best. He defeats this army, and Judas then sends a delegation west to Rome because remember the Romans are still
they're on the rise.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And he secures their support in a bid for his bid for independence, which they give him. Okay, so here's so something amazing happens from this point. Judea gain independence. Now they're going to have 100. They're going to have 100 years of independence
as the Roman Empire grows.
But at what cost? See, this is this at what cost? They're going to have that with Roman support, And look, and I think there is something providential about this whole period. This interfacing with the Romans is going to come back to bite them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's actually that same year, actually after defeating Philip, Lysias and Antiochus were killed. You remember, because he's the regent for this young Antiochus. They're killed by another guy, Antiochus' cousin Demetrius, who he takes the Seleucid throne. He dispatches another army led by a guy called Bacchides. They face off in this very actually famous battle of Elasa in 160 BC. But Judas really, this is one of his failures. He's defeated at this army, and Judas himself is crushed. Judas himself is killed. Jonathan, his brother, takes over. Now, Jonathan isn't the military leader like Judas. Jonathan is a diplomat. So he's going to achieve things with diplomacy. He's a very cunning sort of political leader. It looks as though the cause is lost here, and they're going to go back to where they were as a sort of vassal kingdom. But there's this power dispute now in the Seleucid over Seleucid kingship, and I mean, it actually, one of the sides appeals to Jonathan for support over the other. And, you know, Jonathan is given this right to head an independent military, and is also given the position of the high priest. Now, this is okay because he's from the
family,
not a Zadokite family.
No,
but he's
of the right lineage.
Yeah, but he's given this by the Seleucid king, and this is ironic because Jonathan receives the priesthood. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that they were originally fighting against, but he's willing to accept the priesthood under, sort of sponsored by the Seleucids. So you sort of feel like things are there's a little bit of some problems starting to seep in here. Interestingly, for him to receive that position, there seems to have been this unknown man who was deposed from who rightfully had that position of high priest. He most probably became the founder and the revered leader of the Qumran sect. They are a Jewish sect in Judea that Josephus speaks about them, and they were the ones who put together Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. And their leader was probably the guy that was deposed by Jonathan at this time. Just another interesting little footnote. So Jonathan, through diplomacy, I'm going to cut a long story short here. Through diplomacy,
we're almost out of time. Yeah.
Through diplomacy, Jonathan is able to build up his territory. He wins more and more territory, extends his borders, and he eventually, they are able to actually, under Simon, who replaces him, they have this independence, that they are recognised as an independent kingdom, with sort of recognised by the Romans, and they have to do some deals with the Romans to do this. Simon, like Jonathan, is made high priest. Again, this is a bit of an issue because he's not a Zadokite, but he's this high priest of an independent kingdom that is now going to rule for 100 years.
Now, was it? I think it was under Simon or Simon's son where they first went from high priest to being called, basically king.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah,
that's where you see, you really start getting some issues because it bleeds one into the other, and that rule sort of comes out.
It's actually the title. It's actually his son that takes this title, king. So John Hyrcanus is Simon's son. So it's basically what you've got this independent kingdom of Judea that's going to have 100 years of independence, and they're going to be ruled by the Hasmonean dynasty. So the Hasmonean dynasty are going to be the ruling dynasty. The first of those is John Hyrcanus, and he's going to be far less popular. He's going to be, the popularity with the pious Jews, with the Pharisees, is going to go downhill. Now remember, so you've got this kind of Hasmonean priesthood. So you've got this division now between the kind of priestly classes and the pious Hasidim, the Pharisees on the one hand, and that they're going to have to work together.
Yeah.
But this extends right into the New Testament period.
So let's wrap up with this. That extends to around about 60 AD when basically Rome comes in and says, listen, we're going to start taking ownership of this area. You keep all your things happening there. We're going to put our men over the top of you. And that basically, to cut a very, Matt, I know it was a long story there. I know you love telling that story, but that is cutting even, an incredibly long story short to say this is the era that Christ is born into.
That's right, yeah. So, interestingly, at the end of this period, the Romans are coming, they're looking for ways in which to gain power over anyway. So there's this infighting in the family over, really ugly infighting in the Hasmonean family. The Romans basically exploit this. At one stage, there are two contenders, Hasmonean Aristobulus and Aristobulus II, Hyrcanus II, who both appeal to the Romans. Like they both go to the Romans, and the Romans back one of them, but at great price. So basically, the Romans are basically invited in. So it's interesting that the Roman rule, which is the real bugbear of the Jewish people by the time of Christ, really happens.
It was a political agreement.
It was a political agreement initially. They really sold. Yeah. Their leaders sold themselves to the Jews. Obviously there were lots of Jews that felt that they shouldn't have done that, and so there's this resistance party, and the Hasidim are still there, and you've got the Zealots, and all of these elements are still there. And you've got the ruling class who are kind of pro-Roman. Yeah. Let's just leave things as they are. This is in the first century. You can kind of understand that because they've given their positions through this wheeling and dealing. But then you've got the Hasidic kind of element there, and the Pharisees, and the more radical elements of these, which are the Zealots that want to do another Maccabean revolt.
You've got almost the the people who've cut themselves off living in the desert. Dead Sea Scroll people who John the Baptist was probably familiar with those people out there as well. Like this, when we finally get him, this prophet that's out there. And again, I'm reminded that that the Bible tells us that Christ's arrival wasn't by accident at an accidental time. God is doing all of this for the exact right time, like he says, when the fullness of time has come. That's when Christ arrived, and God was setting up all these elements for Christ to come in at the exact time that he needed to.
Yeah, absolutely. One person who's important in this story, and we do need to finish, this is a bit of a longer episode, isn't it? There was this guy working with the Romans, kind of helping the Romans out, a very shrewd politician called Antipater. And he gains a lot of power under the Roman auspices, and his son is Herod the Great. And eventually, through the same kind of wheeling and dealing, and Herod is going to be given the position of king of the Jews. And Herod actually isn't even, because Antipater was an Idumean, and they were sort of annexed. This goes back into into a previous period. They were annexed by the Jews, and they sort of became Jews, but they weren't really. And so Herod is this kind of non-Jewish Jewish king, and so he's really unpopular. So we meet Herod as well in the New Testament.
It's a classic. We've set up, what was happening in between the Old and New Testament here. We're perfectly set up now to understand what the arrival of Christ in that time. And in next episode, we're going back to Proverbs.
That's right. That's right. As is the custom, we do 2 Old Testament books for. So we're dipping back into the wisdom literature because, of course, a lot of the wisdom literature takes its final form, even though the Proverbs go back to Solomon. There is this collection of proverbs, not only of Solomon but other proverbs, that is put together in the post-exilic period. Would have been pretty much sorted out by the end of the biblical sort of period around 400, probably. But so we go back to that.
So next week we'll go back to the Proverbs and we'll start to read up the same proverbs that Jesus grew up on.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
Yeah,
and the same thing that was in his mind that he was coming through. All right, well, woo-wee. All right, that is the intertestamental period. Something different for us on Thrive Deeper. And if you've got any questions, or if you've got want any more study or anything like that, Matt, you can take care of all of that. All right. Yet again, like last week, I don't know how to finish this episode. You usually have a little pithy thing that we cut off on. Now it's just like, that's it.
Yeah, it's. I think to finish, to say that in the midst of all of the politics and the machinations, God was working in the midst of this, and he was preparing the way. And you've got this Greek language that is spread throughout the empire that's going to be this common, even though Latin was the language of the higher Roman classes, Koine Greek is still throughout the empire. I mean, this is going to really aid the spread of the gospel.
Yeah.
As much as the Jews hated the Romans did bring a period of peace, and they connected everything up in communications that would set things up for the advancement of the gospel. There's a timeliness about this. In all of the chaos and the power struggles, we see that God is sovereign, and he always is.
So there you go. The intertestamental period covered over last episode and this episode. Thank you so much for your patience in going through it. You probably had to do that in a few different sections. I don't think anybody could get through all of that in one hit there. But hopefully that has sparked an interest in you in studying some of the history. This history is so rich that we have in this period. So if you've got any questions or you want some more information, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. Head over to thrivetoday.net.au and you can get some more information there. And I would love to even challenge Matt to send you some more information of what you can be reading and stuff like that. All right, next week we jump into Proverbs. Until then, I'll see you later. This has been DJ Payne for Thrive Deeper. Until next time, thrive.
Thank you so much for listening to Thrive Deeper. We value all our listening community. If you are on Facebook, search and like Thrive Today page to get all of our latest updates. Our home on the internet is at thrivetoday.net.au. There you can subscribe to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide and contact us directly. That's at thrivetoday.net.au. Our music is provided by the talented Rod Gear. For more information, head to rodgearmusic.com. Join the conversation online with over 400 other listeners at facebook.com/groups/Thrive Deeper. The podcast is recorded at the studios of Geelong Christian Media Incorporated, then edited and produced by DJP.FM. Until next time, thrive.